Good morning, hello, and welcome. And let me say welcome to the zoo, an unveiling and discussion of new public art installation in Queen's Park. My name is Stephen O'Shea. I'm the Executive Director of the Arts Council of New Westminster, and we're thrilled to be here this morning to learn more about this new piece, hear from the artist, as well as receive some context around the site and the piece itself based in our history. As we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered on the unceded and traditional territories of the Capota First Nation, and we are honored to be here as uninvited guests and really learn more about the land in which we're situated today and the artwork that we've placed. As we begin, I'm just going to drop some notes in the chat, some housekeeping. So above all, there will be zero tolerance for those who promote violence and against others on the basis of race, ethnicity, national origin, sexual orientation, gender orientation, religious affiliation, different abilities or lived experiences. Anyone who cites harm towards others, other participants, be it through the chat, video, or audio functions, will be removed at the discretion of our technical team and moderator. Thoughtful questions are welcome in the chat at any time, and at the end we will address with a short Q&A from the audience after we hear from our speakers. Please don't assume any speaker's gender pronouns. You're welcome to add it to your name here. In the video image, but we can refer to people using the names that they have in the bottom of their screen. And lastly, please practice self-care. If you need to get up and take a break or turn off your screen, that is absolutely fine and welcome. So I'd like to acknowledge a few people who are in the room. We have artist Nathan Lee. If you want to wave, hello. We have Eryne Donahue, a member of the Public Art Advisory Committee. We have Juana Capota from the New Westminster Museum as the curator. We have the manager of community art and theater, Todd Ayotte, in the room. We have the public and community art coordinator, Quen Huang, in the room. Awesome. And there are other people in the room, and I want to acknowledge you too. So if you don't have an official title, you can also wait. Welcome. Lastly, I'd like to acknowledge Councillor Trentadue, who is in the room, a member of the Public Art Advisory Committee, and will be kicking us off with some opening remarks.
Is it my turn, Stephen? Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here today. Really excited that we have got to this point where we're unveiling, public art in Queen's Park. I think it's been a long time, and we've had lots of challenges actually doing this work because of COVID. So I'm really happy that we've gotten here. Welcome to the Zoo is by Vancouver-based artist Nathan Lee. It's comprised of 4 sets of deconstructed power-coded steel animals. And it references the first zoo in Queen's Park, which began sometime after, I think, in the very early 1900s, 1901, which is really quite remarkable. In going through this process with the Public Art Advisory Committee, I didn't know there had been a zoo in Queen's Park. You know, I think people often refer to the petting zoo, but way back before all of us, there was a zoo in Queen's Park, which is so odd to me, but also really interesting. Many of the animals were not exotic. They were your standard cougars, bears, and deer, which I think is also quite bizarre in a city, but I guess the city did not look like it does today. So maybe it was more relevant or made more sense. We're going to hear from Nathan this morning, and also Eryne Donahue will be participating in the conversation, as well as Oana. And I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very happy that we have got to this place where we are acknowledging and recognizing this beautiful, really beautiful work of art in our park. So thank you very much, Nathan. I'm so thrilled that you did this for us. So thank you. Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you very much, Councillor Trentadue. Appreciate your remarks. Now I would like to turn it over to artist Nathan Lee to speak about the piece itself, and he will be sharing some slides. Nathan, welcome.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the kind words about the project. Everything that you just spoke about, and it's the sort of curious nature of that first zoo. We're going to cover a lot of that in these slides. I think history is relevant. History is very important to my work, and is very important to site-specific public art as well. So that's probably a good place to start. Oops. Are you able to see that? Yeah. So I guess I'll start by sort of talking about public art and in general, and my approach to public art. I really believe that public art is a unique medium. It's unlike gallery art, whose audiences are self-selecting. Public art is democratic and it's open to everyone. This really puts it in a very particular type of work. On one hand, it has this potential to be playful and engaging and enhance the public realm. And we can sort of think of this as, for lack of another term, sort of beautification. On the other hand, because it is in the public realm, it has this really unique capacity to illuminate and challenge. So we can sort of think about this as, education or outreach. I believe that truly successful public art can do both. It can frame how we interpret place and history while delighting us in the experience. This approach is really at the heart of my work, which seeks to engage meaningful social and ecological concepts through humor and whimsy. I like to call this approach heavy but light. So my projects are built on a foundation of thorough research, richly layered with site-specific meaning. This project has applied this approach to Queen's Park and sort of through the process uncovering this playful but illuminating site narrative that's particularly relevant in these strange times. So I guess the first place that I always start is site history. So we're gonna look a little bit into that. Queen's Park early history highlights the interesting relationship that early settlers had with their new home. The unspoiled natural world they found here was filled with unimaginable possibilities. And from a sort of colonial perspective, these were in need of conquering. Early British Columbia's Queen's Park was British Columbia's first public park, and the area was recognized very early on for its natural beauty. In fact, in 1859, Colonel Moody of the Royal Engineers, who would of course later become Canada's first lieutenant governor, is quoted as saying, "The woods are magnificent, superb beyond description, but most vexatious to a surveyor and the first dwellers in a town. I declare without the least sentimentality, I grieve and mourn for the ruthless destruction of these most glorious trees. What a grand old park this hill would make. I am reserving a very beautiful glen and adjoining ravine for the People's Park." So clearly it's called from this point the People's Park. And I think this quote really clearly illustrates the priorities of the time. This park would be designed for and occupied by people, as opposed to being habitat. And also important to recognize, who those people were at the time, predominantly European immigrants. So in 1887, a year after this picture was taken, Queen's Park opened with much fanfare. Five years later, 30 of the 80 acres of the park were cleared. The natural habitat that was there was removed, and vegetation was imported from France, was being planted in its place. By 1890, the province's finest exhibition building was erected, and it was a spectacular tribute to the Queen Anne revival style. So this was really the gem of the park, and it was sort of recognized as being, you know, what made Queen's Park. It was, you know, by all accounts, it was a pretty fantastic facility. So here's where the Queen's Park Zoo is kind of gets introduced, and this curious little piece of history. In 1906, a curious addition was made to the park. The firemen of a nearby Fire Hall Number 1 lent their spare time to the creation of New Westminster's first zoo, which became a pet project for the fire chief. The zoo eventually expanded, so originally it was located at the Fire Hall, and it eventually was expanded and relocated just below the reservoir on the eastern side of the park. From what I could uncover, this is extremely close to where the actual artwork is situated. So yeah, it would be in the right area. The original residents of the park, of the zoo, included 2 bears, 2 coyotes, 2 deer, and 2 cougars. I think it's helpful at this point to sort of think about the history of the modern zoo and what a zoo really meant. Zoos and menageries have existed in human culture for centuries. Exotic animals were kept in ancient Egypt, Rome, Mexico, and China, and they were sort of displays of wealth and power. From a colonial perspective, zoos had particular relevance with respect to power. Zoos were a display of a colonizer's reach, bringing the most impressive and powerful animals from far off conquered land to the heart of the empire. The highly successful and influential London Zoo is a really good example of this. At the turn of the 20th century, zoos were popping up in cities all over North America. Some zoos, such as the Bronx Zoo, were kind of, at the time, they were sort of a random assortment of animals, while other zoos, like the Philadelphia Zoo, were carefully selected exotic species from across the globe. In either case, all zoos kind of fell somewhere within a continuum between education and entertainment. They captured the imagination, they inspired wonder, and I think most importantly for this purpose of this artwork, they really celebrated the exotic. So what makes Queen's Park Zoo particularly interesting is that the first animals that were held there were not particularly valuable or exotic. Black bear, cougar, and deer were all native to the area. A notable exception was the coyote, which is native to the interior grasslands, but adopted exceptionally well to the urban environment, and they were commonplace by this time. These animals were also likely not unfamiliar at the time. It's hard to imagine that an interaction with a deer was novel. In fact, many more of the zoo's early inhabitants would come directly from the surrounding area. Between 1906 and 1912, the Queen's Park Zoo would add, among other animals, a crane, a blue grouse, an owl, an otter, a seal, 2 more bear cubs, and many more deer to its collection. So I think at the root of this piece, what's curious about this is that less than 20 years after clearing the site of rich natural habitat, the zoo would be built to house the animals that once lived there. So to explain this sort of bizarre development, it's helpful to examine not only the zoo and the animals that were there, but also the visitors. New Westminster was one of the largest urban centers in the area, but was still a growing pioneer town. Most of the inhabitants, and by inhabitants, I mean really those who the zoo was built for anyways, were European, recent European immigrants. And so from their perspective, to many, it seemed like their entire existence was exotic. While a bear or deer may have been native to the area, they were still extremely exotic to them. In this context, the inhabitants of the zoo were curious, fascinating, and delightful, albeit in this context, they were pretty sterile and captive. In this way, the Queen's Park Zoo is more about the early immigrants of New Westminster and their relationship with nature than the native wildlife that lived there. So this finally sort of brings us to the art concept for Welcome to the Zoo. So again, this project examines this bizarre relationship of Queen's Park's first zoo. It references the interesting relationship that early settlers had with their environment and explores the idea that then, as now, nature surrounds us. The ability to see it is often a matter of perspective. When you begin to look at your environment through this lens, you realize that nature is often looking back. And so here you can see sort of, you can imagine the bars of a cage. Excuse me. The artwork is composed of deconstructed sculptures of the zoo's first inhabitants. It's made from plate metal, and the animals are segmented much like the bars of a cave. So viewed from an angle, the pieces are abstracted, but as the viewer moves around the work, the complete image comes into focus. Animal sculptures are thoughtfully placed around the site within mounded planter beds. The elevated position allows viewing from a number of angles, but restricts potential physical access to the work itself. For most positions throughout the plaza, the deconstructed forms sort of pique curiosity and they hint at a larger composition. But when viewed from very strategic locations, the pieces visually connect and they reward the viewer with wonder and discovery. Here's a picture of the complete installation with all of the animals. So as a side note, as a final note, this was mentioned a little bit earlier, but this project was really developed and proposed during an extremely unique time in modern history. I was working on this during the global lockdown in 2020 in response to the COVID pandemic. This was when we were all sort of just getting used to isolation and locked into our houses, and really the streets were empty at the time. As people isolated themselves in an attempt to stop the spread of the coronavirus, our parks and green spaces saw a dramatic decrease in human activity. Within this newly still environment, wildlife all over the world began to reclaim their habitat. Coyotes wandered the streets of San Francisco. Cougars explored the sidewalks of San Diego. Deer were grazing in the front yards of East London. The pandemic highlighted the effects that we have on our surrounding environment. With lockdown across the globe, CO2 emissions dropped off, and nature was reintroducing itself back into our cities. This was, and it still is, a really unique time for reflection. It's a rare opportunity to examine our relationship with the natural world. So getting back to the artwork, as we kind of explore this really strange cultural context that led to the creation of the Queen's Park Zoo, I think we have to also look at our perspective. We have to ask ourselves how future generations will look at the decisions that we make today. Will the current crisis be a speed bump in our urban and economic development, or will it signal a cultural shift in direction? It's been a few months since the lockdown, and we can sort of start, and maybe this is a point for discussion later, but we can sort of start to see how that short-term blip had long-term implications in terms of how we look at our public spaces. So this is just another little side note, but through a collaborative project with Art Services, the New Media Gallery, and Museum of Heritage, these kind of DIY maquettes were developed. The project was called Wander the Park, but the DIY maquettes were also a part of the proposal. So this is kind of ideas to allow people to, because we all can't experience the site with social distancing, it sort of allows people to take a little piece of the artwork home with them, and it kind of experience Queen's Park in this art concept. So this is a sort of cut and paste and fold, make your own Welcome to the Zoo kit for home, and it's available through the city's website, and also it's available on my website as well. So I encourage you all to take a stab at it. It's pretty fun to make.
Thank you very much, Nathan. That was a great presentation and great to get a background on the piece that you've created. For those in attendance, if you would like to submit questions through the chat, we'll be having a session at the end after everyone has a chance to speak, and we can certainly dig more into what Nathan has presented. Next, I would like to turn it over to Eryne Donahue, a member of the Public Art Advisory Committee, to share about her experience with this piece and the entirety of her time on the PAAC. Eryne.
Thank you, Stephen, and thanks, Nathan. That was exciting to revisit your work again. So I've had the privilege of participating on the city's Public Art Advisory Committee for about the last 6 years, and I spent 2020 as the committee chair. Just as a little bit of a background, the role of the advisory committee, which I'm just going to call PAAC because it's a bit of a mouthful, is to champion public art within the city as a placemaker, an instigator of dialogue, something that builds culture within the city, revitalizes spaces such as in the case of this work, and really it's kind of a point of pride for the community. There are really so many functions and impacts of public art on the city, and I'm probably leaving a lot out, but needless to say, I think it's an exciting collection that we're building, and it's also been a point of pride for me as a citizen of New West to participate in this process. So I guess as a PAAC, our role really is we're tasked with advising city staff and council on things like the procurement of new works, the siting of work, maintenance and deaccessionment, as well as building public art policy. So I myself am a visual artist and an arts educator and designer. And my fellow PAAC members are also arts professionals, urban designers, architects, engineers, and then of course we have our hardworking city staff, some of who are here today, and Mary as our councillor. And all of us meet about every 2 months to discuss the various things that I've mentioned here. So one of the most exciting aspects for me in this role on PAAC has been, of course, bringing on new work. So I was delighted when I had the opportunity to also sit as a jury member for this particular project. And we had a lot of really great submissions. The site is an interesting one because it's multifaceted, and in the call that was put out for the work, we'd left it quite open because we were hoping for something that would really encourage movement around the space, make something active. And when you look at kind of the history of public art, there's sort of the negative side of it that I think we're happily moving away from since probably about 2000 in the world, where I remember when I was in school, we learned a lot about things like plop art, and you know, it's just sort of an expression of the power of capitalism, right? You just throw a piece of art, meaningless art, into a space, and it really doesn't have a relationship with the site. But as a PAAC, we're really keen on building the work into the urban design itself, really considering who's consuming this work, who's going to be experiencing it, how they're going to experience it, and is there a way to encourage maybe more critical dialogue? Is there a way to engage people in a greater conversation about things like, what is art, and what does this place mean to us, and who are we as citizens of New West? So we had some great submissions, but as a jury, we had a kind of an immediate consensus with Nathan Lee's work because it really hit all the marks. We were looking for something that was inclusive, something that really acknowledged the 7 bold steps that the city's put out. It was something that allowed viewers to move about and understand the work from multiple perspectives. And I think when you really dig into that, there's a lot of meaning there, because if you've got a work cited along the center of a promenade, it's kind of telling you how to look at it. But with Nathan Lee's work, we can come at it from different angles and from our own approach and understand it in our own way. And it unfolds for us. So it's kind of like, it's mirroring the way that we slowly understand the history of this place over time. I think all of us are kind of in that position now where we're learning so much about the things that make this city, the people who have built it, how it was built, some of the contentious things. I know that when I read Nathan Lee's proposal for the work, it brought tears to my eyes. I thought it was particularly poignant. And it's an absurd story, and it's also really sad. And so, you know, when I look at his work, part of me feels like I'm seeing ghosts that are resurrected in that site. So we were really happy as a PAAC to bring this work on. We had a 1% from the capital project, but added funds to it because we were really looking for something that would have a great impact for residents of New Westminster. And I think that we've really gotten that and more. Upon visiting the site, I've felt it continue to unfold for me. And just, I'd like to speak a little bit to the process of jurying this work, because as Mary mentioned, it was kind of a strange time. We'd had the artworks brought forward. Typically what we do as jury members is bring the shortlisted artists to us to present. And everything was kind of put on hold. The artists worked so hard at trying to, you know, present in a way that they probably hadn't before. And Nathan Lee's sort of origami-like cutouts that we were able to put together really helped us to envision what the work would look like. It was particularly playful. I know my children were delighted to help me set those up along our windowsill. And I think that that playfulness is also carried through the work, the way that we can kind of approach it and they sort of pop out at us. So the work's multifaceted, and I think it really matches the space as something more than just a spectacle, but something that carries a lot of historical weight and something that that can kind of tickle us, surprise us, and excite us when we approach the new Sportsplex. So I would just like to congratulate Nathan Lee on his work, and I think that this is sort of a new jewel in our public art crown. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's very kind words. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Eryne. I really appreciate you sharing about the Public Art Advisory Committee. Next, I would like to invite Juana Capota, Curator of the New Westminster Museum, to speak and share some slides. And just a reminder to everyone in attendance, if you do have questions, please place them in the chat. We'll get to them after Juana's presentation. Juana, it's all yours.
Sure, thank you. I'll just start sharing my screen as well. Okay. So hello, everybody. As Stephen said, my name is Juana Capota. I'm the curator of the New Westminster Museum. We are located, the museum and archives are in the Anvil Center. We also have two other facilities. One is Irving House, where we used to work out of, and as well we have a ship right by the quay called the Samson 5. A lot of people see the Samson V, but it is the fifth and last out of a series of ships that worked along the waterfront. As part of my work, I mostly work with people who donate items to the museum to collect their history. I also work to do temporary exhibits. During the pandemic, Nathan approached us and to ask about some history, and we were happy to share what we have. So this talk will go a little bit more in depth on top of what Nathan said. I will talk about the general history and look a little bit more at the Queen's Park Zoo and the information we have now. This first photograph, it's one of my favorites of Queen's Park, and it shows some of the fantastic topiary sculptures that were in Queen's Park in the 1920s. I have heard that there were also squirrel topiaries. I have not yet found a photo of them, but so far this is my favorite one, this bird or a chicken, whatever it is. The zoo itself had both exotic animals, what was exotic at the time, and local wildlife. And in my slide that I made yesterday, I had no photos of those animals from that first zoo. I did find one just before this talk, and I will share the link at the end of the talk. So right now we're going to back up a little bit and go to the history of the park, 1859. Again, here is the quote that Colonel Moody made. Colonel Moody was one of the soldiers sent here, one of the sappers or Royal Engineers sent here to start laying the groundwork for the colony of British Columbia. So what they did was they looked at militarily where would be the best part of British Columbia to protect the province. That's why New Westminster was set up. And if anybody has walked up and down our hills, you know that this is, again, from an army point of view, a really good place. But what they also did was they made the roads around New Westminster. They laid the grid system that we have, and of course they planned to have Queen's Park, and it was one of a number of parks in the city. There were others more in the downtown area, and this was one laid aside a little bit to the northeast. That was 1859 when they came here. That's when this quote was from. Now, the park itself was officially inaugurated on June 14th, 1887, so actually just 3 weeks before today. And that was by Mayor Robert Dickinson. Here he is in the 1880s. And he was on and off mayor for a long time in the city, as you can tell by the dates. So the quote here is about how Queen's Park was established. So they started hoisting flags, they had decorations, the military band played that morning, and 3 p.m. was the official opening. They did a few talks on site, and then had a royal salute. And as the years went by, the park was used for different things. In particular, the first 30 years, it was predominantly the exhibition site. So we've seen this photograph before, and it was, this was built starting in 1890. I can't remember the exact year when it was finished, but it must have been 1890 or 1891. And about 5,000 people could visit. There was also a viewing gallery for the athletic field, which I'll show you in a later photo. This is a photo from the 1920s, and I just thought it was really nice and atmospheric, so I included it here. The other thing about this photo, eventually all these buildings actually burned down in 1929, but instead of showing those ones, I thought this one was, it's a little bit happier. So here's the view of the stadium from the top of the exhibition building. And you can see that this is actually showing one of the agricultural shows where they would rate cows and horses and sheep and so on. But I think this particular one is mostly cows here. And as well in the background, you can see a Ferris wheel, other tents and other rides that happened. In 1891, what became BC Electric, they built the interurban tram line. And this one went up Park Row. This is on First Street right here. That's this Chinese family we have in this photo, also going either towards the park or catching the tram. And in the background, you could see the exhibition building. 1892 was when McBride Boulevard was completed. And of course, later on in 1937, when the Patello Bridge was installed, there were some other changes. So this photo right here, it is actually from 1928. And it mostly shows the asylum grounds. At that time, it was called the Public Hospital for the Insane. And this is where Woodlands was and is now the Victoria Hill development. You can see McBride is kind of off in the upper left corner. It's that road, the line going down. Other buildings that were on the site were ones like the Women's Building, built in about 1905. And from what I understand of this building, that's where people would go and get refreshments. There was also the Industrial Building, probably also around 1905. And here's another photograph showing the Industrial Building, the Women's Building, and the Agricultural Exhibition Building with this reservoir that was also built on site. I have this map of the grounds. I was given this by a previous archivist, but they forgot to give me the date of it. I suspect, to me, it's 1920s. And I looked around for the zoo and I couldn't find any reference for it. In the left upper corner, there are buildings for dogs, the stables, places for goats, and so on. But I don't see the zoo itself there. And you could see, just coming back to it, the layout of where the stadium is. So going back to that photo that was photographed from on top of the exhibition building, you could see how it would have been looking down at the stadium, and then there's the reservoir. We have a number of photos of the exhibitions themselves and all the vegetables that were on display. This is just one of them of Salmon Arms exhibition of the time. And if anybody wants to look at these photographs, look up the New Westminster Museum and Archives online search. And we have, I believe we're up to about 35,000 photos online that anyone can look at. And you can just search for whatever your interest is. All of the photos in this series will come up. As well, just another image of some of the animal exhibitions that went on. Many, many photos, and I could have shown you far more of them, but I just picked this one because it is a little bit closer, more of a close-up so you could see all the cows on parade. The other thing is, that happened at the exhibition, lots of different shows. Basically, the provincial exhibition was like a type of PNE. When it burnt down in 1929, that was just before the Great Depression started in October of that year. The exhibition buildings burnt down in July. They were still able to open the exhibition in September, but in tents. And unfortunately, because of the stock market crash, they weren't able to get enough insurance money to rebuild. Some of the buildings that were built back were the arena and a few other ones, places like the Bernie Lake Theatre, which was an administrative building, and before that, a fisheries building. That building didn't burn down, so it was saved. But going back to the provincial exhibition, they would have different shows, including this stable from, I think they were based out of Alberta, but they had a horse that was raised here called Barra Lad. And Barra Lad in 1925, on September 12th, broke the world record for the high jump. It was 8 feet and 1.5 inches. The horse did touch the top bar, but it didn't fall down. So there was some discussion whether or not the record would stand. Unfortunately, when the horse jumped and hit the ground, it ended up injuring itself. It got a ruptured blood vessel. By evening that night, it got paralyzed, and about 12 hours after it broke this record, it passed away. The city of New West decided to bury the horse just outside of the arena, and I believe made a monument to it. A few years ago, some bones were discovered, and it may have been this horse's bones. Now, getting back to the zoo specifically, again, I didn't have any photos, but I was able to find this postcard of one of the topiary birds in Queen's Park. And again, it's some sort of bird. It doesn't look like a chicken to me. And I thought this would be a good stand-in for those missing animals that Nathan is now resurrecting through his art. So the zoo actually started across the street at the fire hall, roughly at 4th Avenue and 1st Street, just north of the current entrance. And the firemen, they built some pens and they put in animals there. They started off with basically local animals like bears, and eventually the zoo started to get bigger and bigger. By 1906, they moved the zoo into Queen's Park itself. The way that they got the animals was a lot of community involvement. It actually matches a lot of how we work at the museum. We get people from the community donating items to us. And the same thing happened with the zoo. People would catch seals in their nets, or they would catch pheasants and grouse and bring them in. So right here, I put 2 articles from 1906 that I thought were a little bit funny. Chief Watson was the fire chief, and of course the fire department was responsible for the zoo. But you could see some of the animals that were offered, like squirrels and blue jays, and they actually had to turn them down. On May 17th, 1906, they also had an offer of a Pallas cat, which I believe is a sort of wild cat from Central Asia. And interestingly enough, they got one. This is the only article I found so far about this mysterious cat, and I'm not quite sure who had it and why it was donated. So this one was actually quite exotic. I also mentioned a seal that was caught, and there was quite a bit of drama about it. A few years ago, one of our volunteers that I should name, Emma Kwan, she was involved in a lot of this animal research. Emma is a student at Douglas College and had been with us for a number of years. And 2 or 3 years ago, Emma decided to do a bit more research into the seal, and she did a presentation about it. And what she found was that the seal was caught. It was purchased by somebody in US to bring to the zoo. And from the newspaper articles, it seemed like there was a bit of rivalry between our zoo here in US and the Stanley Park Zoo, because the newspaper articles would say things like our seal was finer than its brother in Stanley Park. Unfortunately, there was quite a bit of drama. Young kids came into the zoo and they mistreated the seal. There was a lot of newspaper coverage about that. And we don't know what happened in the end. A lot of these animals, they were just mentioned once or twice, and then there was no follow-up. Some other interesting things that happened, again, the exotic animals that were there. Just yesterday, I found these references from September 1913 about there was a trade between Canadian animals and Australian birds that were sent over here to be put on display. And what I really liked about this one is that it actually names the animals. And it says that Australia got 2 bears and 3 deer. Now, we don't know exactly when this zoo ended. We do have a few references from World War I, and then a little bit, the trail kind of runs dry in the 1920s. One of the references I found a while ago, and unfortunately I didn't save it for this talk, was at some point during the teens, around 1916, the zoo ended up with too many bears. They were breeding in captivity. And in the reference I found, it was actually a newspaper description of an alderman's meeting where they were trying to decide what to do with all the bears. And 2 of the aldermen said, "We will shoot them." I'm not quite sure if that's what happened or not. I didn't get a chance to follow up in the newspapers. It could also be that during World War I, Queen's Park was taken over by the armed forces for training. So what we have here is an image of soldiers just at the current 3rd Avenue entrance there with some houses in the background. So maybe that's when the zoo kind of petered out. Nevertheless, we don't know exactly, but eventually the zoo was resurrected in a different form as a petting zoo. There were a lot of farm animals. In later years, just before it closed before the pandemic, there was also a type of catio there where cats from New Westminster Animal Services, adoptable cats were put on display. I saw guinea pigs and rabbits, peacocks, and children would play with them. This photo, we don't know who Rosanna Marchetti is, but if anybody knows her and she's still around, it would be great to meet her and to talk to her about her work in the 1970s. Here's the photo that was shown previously in Nathan's slides. This is from around 1910, visiting the bears. My version of the photo, you can't quite see it, but apparently in the negative, you can actually see the bears. And I wanted to bring up, to let everybody know about a self-guided program at Queen's Park. That's a collaboration between ourselves at the New Westminster Museum and Art Services and the New Media Gallery. it's called Wander New West, and you can visit the park and see different displays during the month of July. You have QR codes, and once you follow the links, you could see more archival photos of Queen's Park and read a little bit about the history and start to think about how the park was built and imagine how it would have looked if different voices were included. So thank you very much. If you have any questions at the museum and archives, we're always happy to work with the public and answer anything you have. If anybody wants to contact me, my email address is there and I can share it again at the end. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Juana. That was great and a real awesome deep dive into the history of the zoo. I'm definitely going to use that when people give me feedback about our most recent closure of the petting farm. I'll be like, it's not the first time it's closed, so that's great to have the historical context. And I'm really excited that we were able to connect it to the work itself that Nathan has created. So we're now going to move into a Q&A, and I'm going to have to quickly read and lightly curate. So please excuse the awkwardness of all of this. But I can definitely see already that there's a lot of favorable comments towards Nathan for his work in the chat. And just so there is a question around public art itself from Michael and Judy, and it's directed towards Eryne and Mary, and it's in connection to the City of City of Vancouver's challenges with the Vancouver Biennale piece, The Boy Holding Shark. That was approved and unapproved, considering public backlash. The question would be, how does New Westminster avoid such awkward situations with our own public art program?
I could speak to this. Yeah, I could speak to this a little bit. Maybe I'll let you do the same after. Yeah, that's, I mean, I guess one of the real important parts to the way that our public art advisory committees run is that community participation is sort of at its core. And I think that when you're dealing with anything that's put out into the public, consultation is critical, right? But when you've got a board that's made up of people who are invested in the city as residents and in their community, the interests of their community, as well as people who have a strong background in both the arts and understand the feasibility of the work. I think that it creates more of a positive relationship with between the community and the work that's positioned there. So we're not necessarily creating work and sort of throwing it at people. We're participating in the work on some level as representatives of a community. So I think that our particular role is critical in how the work is received in the end. That said, a certain level of discomfort with public art is really important too. Just like anything else in life, I think that it shows us that we're in a position of learning, right? When we're a little bit uncomfortable with something, maybe it requires more thought and more conversation. And so, you know, as a public art advisory committee, we're also hoping for work that creates that little bit of stimulation for the audience as well. I can't speak to exactly the way the public art programs run in Vancouver. And I think that I know that work, I think, has been brought to Vancouver by the Vancouver Biennale, I believe. I don't think that they're as invested, well, I don't want to speak to that particularly, but they're not necessarily run by community, whereas this is a community endeavor in New West, so we have that going for us. Mary, maybe you can speak to that on a different level.
Yeah, just no, that was great, Erin. And
Yeah.
I agree with everything that you said. I just want to add a couple of things. I don't know if people remember, but the WOW piece, which was also a Biennale, was highly controversial.
Yes.
And it wasn't so much, I guess, when I think back to the controversy, it wasn't so much we don't want it in that location, is people didn't like it or get it or understand why the city would put money towards it. And there was a lot of back and forth about whether we should or shouldn't. And the PAAC just moved forward and did it, because that was the whole point of public art in the community. And we kind of relished the conversations that went on, because it really brought public art to the forefront, and people were arguing and debating, and there was lots of dialogue, and that, in our mind, that's the whole point. But it's interesting, the lifespan of the WOW is not what we expected. And when in the fire last year, there was a lot of really upset people about WOW, because they had come to love it, and felt that it was really a symbol of New West. So I think it was a really interesting piece. And I love the fact that people hated it. Frankly, I think that's what gets people talking, right? And then, so about this piece, I have to confess, like, I did hear about it. I listened to CBC and heard the dialogue and thought, wow, like, that's so interesting that they would not like it. I was very surprised that they rolled it back and moved it. And I can't really say that I would never have done that, because I don't know really why they did, or I don't know. All I can say is that one of the things I heard was that some of the comments from people who didn't want it was the sort of classic, oh, we love the art, it's just the wrong place for it. And, frankly, I've heard that statement related to many things, housing for one. And so it always makes my back go up a little bit when I hear people love something but not there. So I don't really know why it was rolled back. I don't know why they moved it. I will dig into it. I will love to find out. I just haven't had the opportunity. Okay, Nathan, you can tell us. I know somebody on this Zoom call is going to know more about it. So I would love to know that, but I don't know. Seems like a weird thing that it was called back. Nathan?
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there. I just wanted to, I don't know the specifics of that, but I just kind of wanted to weigh in on the topic in general, because I think I mentioned it there at the first part of the presentation, what kind of a unique animal public art is. And like I was mentioning it before, is kind of this idea of beautification and enhancement of the public realm, and then this idea of challenging people about place and about history, and about, like, it should be site specific and it should be all of these things, but it should also be really challenging. And the nature of art is subjective, which makes it inherently difficult in the public realm. Like, not everyone's going to get it, not everyone's going to like it, regardless if they get it or not. If they're not going to like it, Mary, I think you had a really great point about, people are talking about it, and that's a win right there. I think a lot of times the discussions kind of revolves around the investment in it and where that money is coming from. I know that, when I first started making public art, it was very uncomfortable conversations to have around that. And I also think, Eryne, you brought up a great point. It's okay to be uncomfortable. That's part of being challenged. But I think we need to be a lot more comfortable in defending the public realm, and investments in culture and investments in our urban fabric. Like, they are long-term investments, like the W, that sort of, and there's countless other pieces that were not enjoyed very much at the beginning, but later on came to really emblemize a place. I think you think about the East Van Cross and how that has been just so widely embraced now, but it was controversial at the beginning. And these are I guess that I'll say that these are investments in long-term public space, in the public realm. They're important investments to make, and they're worth defending. And also that it's hard to be challenged. It's a hard thing for the public to be challenged. And it's also uncomfortable being challenged. And that is kind of the nature of the work.
Awesome. Thank you to each of you for those comments. That is great. I love that we dug into that right away. The next question is for Nathan, and it comes from Eryne. She says, I know the work was meant to coordinate with the upcoming new signage in the park, and the color is really striking. Have you thought about this and how people may understand the work through color?
Yeah, I actually ended up changing the color from the original proposal. There's some future wayfinding designs that are going into the park, and I think initially the idea was to try to integrate the color scheme as much as possible, and then kind of I guess looking a little bit more at the color, the existing color, I didn't really feel like it fit the work, but I did like the idea of sort of that vibrant poppiness. I think like colors like bright orange, you know, it's cautionary color. It's the like I kind of often go back to like you know, pre-tinted construction grade like colors, like the, you know, caution yellows and the caution oranges. Like they're poppy for a reason, but also, I mean, in this case, you know, it's kind of a cautionary tale in a lot of ways. So it makes a lot of sense. And then just the blocking, just the way that the shapes are deconstructed and then they come back together again. And like I'm so happy to hear that you actually built the maquette with your kids, and I'm glad to hear that was fun. It's a part of kind of it's a part of my process in developing the artwork is to build maquettes. So for me, I was already developing the files and the vectors to make those files. So because I wasn't able to present to you because of COVID, which was a really odd place to be from somebody who's making a proposal, kind of giving that opportunity to you and then now out to sort of the larger public. To build it yourself was fun. I'm so glad that you built it. Yeah, it's great.
Awesome, thank you for that. Next, we have a question from David, and it's a longer one. I'll read it out, but if you want to follow along in the chat as I read it, it may help. This is a question for both Nathan and Eryne. Can you tell us about the considerations of your designing and from the point of view of the committee, the evaluation leading through to selection about how you are hoping for A, the public spectator will negotiate current ideas about historical and future Indigenous perspectives on this unceded land of the park, and B, the function of these animals in the historical role of the life-sustaining world view of the Indigenous peoples, animals now represented in steel, a technology of the colonizing settlers. David goes on to ask, could you briefly share some thoughts about the complex relationship at work as we gaze upon this work, and how does it participate in our current important reflections?
Wow, that's a big question. I can speak to some of this, I suppose, in terms of materials, but in terms of selection and evaluation, I think Eryne's probably can speak to that more. In terms of the material selection of steel, as I mentioned before, public art is kind of unique in a way that there are sort of practical demands that are required within public art construction. Like things have to be able to withstand the sort of punishing and physical characteristics of A, being outside, B, being in the public realm and being safe, being engineered and not collapsing. I wish that this was kind of a conceptual layer that I could weave into the work, but really, when it comes down to it, like things have to be pretty bulletproof, and so your list of potential materials can get quite short. I've built things that aren't public work, that are, you know, delicate and handcrafted and you know, meant to be viewed but not touched in an indoor setting, that just, it can't apply in the public realm. It just doesn't, it's not a suitable material. So I guess in short, like, you're absolutely right. Like, steel is kind of this, you know, there's these inherent values that are within steel on a practical level. It's a durable and known building material, and I wanted to create something that was going to last, and was going to be an investment. Yeah, maybe
I'll pick up from there. I can try. I'll attempt that, David. Well, I think that, you know, there's a lot of layers to how we could read this work. I think I mentioned that I felt like these were kind of ghosts being brought back when we first viewed it as a jury. That, I think, our understanding was that, you know, this is something kind of a reflection on, it's not really about the animals, it's about how they were housed, and it's about how they were a spectacle. And these aren't the animals that we're viewing. This is our creation of the space using the tools of a colonizer. So I think what we're looking at is not so much the past of the park, but how we've created that park, if that makes sense. That's my understanding of it. I don't know if that's your intention, Nathan, but I'm kind of seeing something reflected back to me about how this space was formed. And then in turn, I get to understand the impact that I've had, and go from there as a kind of reconciliation, maybe, of where I want to take that space in the future, how I want to understand the space in the future, if that makes any sense. So in a way, I think it's kind of like you could probably sit with that work for a while, or keep revisiting it every time you drop your kids off at the Sportsplex, and think a little bit more about where we've come from and where we're going. It's kind of an identity piece, maybe. I don't know.
I think that like looking at the history of the zoos was really a big piece of, like, looking at colonization, and kind of we take our assumptions of what a zoo is and what a zoo is intended to be as kind of this entertainment and education. And I mean, you could debate a lot about how educational zoos are, and how, like, on what side of entertainment versus education that sort of they fall on. But you know, looking at sort of, yeah, the idea of zoos being a display of power and the colonizer's power, like, I think it's, yeah, that's kind of, that would be the layer that would be speaking to colonization and what that means, and our assumptions and our learning about where we sit within that.
Thank you both for those comments. It's really great reflection, and really sits well with the piece in terms of the question. Thank you, David, for that. Next, we have a question from Quinn, and it's for Juana. Could you let us remind us, when exactly did the zoo close?
Quinn, we don't know exactly. There's some talk that it was around World War I, at the very latest, the 1920s, but we haven't found anything specifically yet. we're still kind of on the lookout.
Awesome, thank you for that. Next, we have a question from Jim Wolf, who noticed the historic concrete block wall of the old reservoir was incorporated into the landscape of the new art piece. And he wondered, are there any considerations of this in the public art installation as part of harkening back to the park's history?
Yes, so yeah, this is my understanding of the site, is that the rock wall that is kind of on the perimeter of where the parking is to where the planter beds are, was the original rock wall of the reservoir. That's the retention of that rock wall isn't really a part of my scope in terms of the public art. I know that the landscape design team had made an effort to retain as much of that existing wall as possible for its heritage value, which is it's a pretty amazing wall. I know a piece of it came down and was on site when they were sort of trying to cobble it back together. Yeah, it's pretty neat to see. I think, and maybe as it relates to the artwork, that rock wall is kind of the only real clues that I could piece together of like where exactly the zoo was located. Like Oana, you showed that map earlier about the sort of the layout, and I had found that same map, and the zoo was not in that map. Not to say that it wasn't there at the time, or it might have been labeled as something else, but the closest that I could get in terms of figuring out the exact location of the zoo was with relation to the reservoir. And so that rock wall kind of allowed me to place the zoo in pretty close proximity to where the artwork is situated.
Awesome. We have a final question for you, Nathan. This one, I think you should have an easy time answering. What was the original color for your proposal of this piece?
Yeah, it was kind of it was this really vibrant, it's somewhere in between like blood red and hot pink. Like it was kind of somewhere in that. And I think it worked. It's going to work really well for signage. I know that there were some comments about the kind of maybe the blood red color, maybe, that had some different connotations to it. It was very, very vibrant, very, very bright. It's a great poppy color, just not the right color for sort of this application.
Awesome, thank you for that. Great to learn more. Okay, I want to thank everyone who has attended and who has brought questions today. That concludes our Q&A and the presentation from our panelists. I'd just like to acknowledge some of our sponsors who made this event possible today. Fundraising in the community in the aftermath of the end of WOW Westminster. There were organizations, businesses in the community who fundraised and support so that we could do this today. So I'd like to thank Steel and Oak Brewing Company, Pattison Brands, and community members who donated through the SaveTheW.ca campaign. Of course, the Arts Council of New Westminster wishes to acknowledge the funding and support of the City of New Westminster, the BC Arts Council, and the province of BC that allows us to do the work that we do in this community. And what a fun foray for us into the world of public art programming. This is the first time the Arts Council's hosted a panel such as this, and we're thrilled to get to speak more with Nathan, with Eryne, and with Juana about the Welcome to the Zoo piece. So thank you to each and every one of you for attending today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.